Well, hello and welcome to this last video on Todd May's book, Death. We've already covered two chapters out of the three chapters of the book. In the first video, we talked about our dealings with death. Then in the second, we talked about death and immortality. And in this last chapter, we are going to cover living with death. So far, we've argued that death is bad for us because it cuts short all of our ongoing projects for no good reasons. We're just, left with unfinished business, kind of like ghosts who linger, who cannot pass on to the afterlife until someone finishes their business for them. It's like that old show. I don't know if you remember that. It's from the early 2000s. A show called Ghost Whisperer. It was with Jennifer Love Hewitt, like the one in which she plays a woman, Melinda Gordon, who can see and speak to ghosts and help them figure out why they're still here. And so she's kind of like bringing closure to them. And once they have that closure, they can accept that they're dead, and so they can move on to the afterlife. But in reality, there is no Melinda Gordon. There is no possible closure, no meaning to be added to one's life. So we are looking at what we can do to cure us. We looked at what we can do to cure us from death, and so we looked at the possibility of immortality. But as we've seen, being immortal is a cure that turns out to be worse than the disease, so it offered no sense of closure. And so we ended with a debate between the two philosophers, Thomas Nigel and Bernard Williams. And if you remember, Nigel was saying that death is always bad for us, it is always an evil, whereas Williams was more like, no, the problem is that we always die at the wrong time, like we either die too early or too late. And so in Williams's view, there are two possibilities. You can either die young or live long enough to see yourself become bored. So William argues that since we cannot and we shouldn't cure death, we should try to live in ways that when death comes, it will be the right time for us to die, like the perfect time between these two extremes, between dying too young or too too late. But as May pointed, there is no such time. There are too many variables, too many things that we cannot predict to make all of our plans fit in a definite structure that would make death to arrive at the right time. As he says, given the way humans engage in projects, given how we orient ourselves towards the future, it is difficult to see how death could arrive at any appropriate time for most of us. So instead, what we have to do is just learn how to live with death. And so living with death is, of course, different from trying to avoid it or not to think about it. And as we've said in the first video, options of either not thinking about death or thinking constantly about it don't work either. If we want meaningful lives, we have to confront our mortality, acting like we can, get rid of death or control it, like in William's views. That's not going to give us the meaningful lives that we are looking for in the first place. Death is like germs, and to quote May, germs and death will always be with us. There is no ritual that eliminates them or even ensures that we have any space between us and them. So living with death doesn't also mean that we try to find loopholes or cheat codes, such as maybe leaving a legacy behind. We've already talked about this last time. It's a way for people to achieve immortality, and we've already seen that immortality isn't good for you. Moreover, as we've pointed, the problem of immortality isn't just that it is bad, but that it is impossible to become immortal unless you want to give up on your humanity. So if a legacy allows you to be immortal, you won't be a human being anymore. You won't be the same you that you wanted the legacy to preserve. So the you that you seek to protect with the legacy will be long gone. So a legacy won't confer meaning to someone's life after their death, because a legacy is something for the living, not for the dead. So for a legacy to be meaningful, it has to leave me behind, not some trace of me. It has to be me. And as May writes, when I die, I die, and no building bearing my name can stop that. I will no longer awake to see the leaves against the sky, or feel my wife next to me, or hear my kid's voice. My writing will cease. My hopes for and my engagements with this world will come to an end with me. In short, leaving something behind does not leave me behind. But even if leaving a legacy would allow that kind of immortality, as May points out, is very limited. A legacy requires that people stick around to maintain that legacy, but those people will die too. So, like, we can just rely on our closest relatives and friends, and they certainly will maintain a strong memory of us. But as time goes by, the legacy will start to deteriorate till there is just maybe one or two facts about us at best, before at one time, even those facts will disappear as well. And so here May draws on the Stoic philosopher and the Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius's book, Meditations, in which Aurelius says, "All things fade into the storied past, and in a little while are shrouded in oblivion. Even to men whose lives were a blaze of glory, this comes to pass. As for the rest, the breath is hardly out of them before, in Homer's words, they are lost to sight alike and hearsay." So this passage from Aurelius is significant, and we will go back to the Stoics for insights about how to live with death. But here the point that Aurelius is trying to make, and that will be very influential for May, is that our lives are fragile. So Aurelius is talking about the fragility of our lives and existence in the face of death. That nothing of me survives it. So living with death also means living with this fragility, which most of our strategies to cheat death would deny. They would deny that our lives are fragile in this way. So everything we've talked about so far aren't really problematic because they deny death, but because they also deny the very nature of our lives, which is, their fragility. Quote, "They all neglect the fragility of life. If we are to come to terms with the dilemma we found ourselves in at the end of the previous chapter, it is this fragility we must recognize and learn to live with and to live within." So how can we accept that fragility? How can we live with our vulnerability in the face of death? And so May sketches a metaphor for us through an antique watch. He says, let's imagine that you have an antique watch, like you received it as a souvenir from your grandpa, or something like that. It's been in your family for generations, so it's quite used and extremely fragile. You don't want anything bad to happen to it, so what do you do with it? Well, a possibility is you just put it away. You put it in a drawer, or in a glass case. That will protect the watch. But if you do that, then, as May says, it would not be a watch anymore. It would be a museum piece, and the fact that it told time would be irrelevant to it. It would not matter whether it still had its insides working. It would no longer be a watch. It would be art in the sterile sense in which we often use the term. So, as you can guess, May isn't really fond of art museums. He sees art as something that is, to be integrated in our lives, but when it is kept in a museum, it loses the very thing that makes, a piece of art, art. What matters with art is the intimacy that we feel with a certain painting, for example. So having a painting in your room or in an office feels like, the art is doing what it's supposed to be doing, rather than, having an impersonal display in a museum. So the art needs to be touched, maybe redone. It has to serve its functions, just like, a watch is to be worn until time. So preserving life like an antique watch in a drawer is, basically not living at all. So of course May is aware of the other side of the problem. There's also the YOLO generation that embodied this idea, but it's not what May has in mind either if you are too too reckless with the watch, you'll damage it too quickly and too soon. You wouldn't have the chance of experiencing everything the watch had to offer. So sure, you can go crazy with some watches that are easy to replace or that didn't have much meaning ascribed to them. Like a common watch, for example, you brought for no reason other than you needed to know the time. But here we're talking about an antique that is fragile and that have been around for enough time, and giving to you it was given to you in a special context that doesn't make it just any regular watch. Quote, if you treat an antique watch too cavalierly, it will not function as a watch for very long. Using a watch as a watch is great, but there does seem to be something not quite right about treating an antique watch like a Timex. It seems to deserve better than that because it's a valuable and fragile object. So what do you do with the watch? Is somehow in the middle between these two extremes. So you wear it and you be careful with it, not in a neurotic sense, but you don't abuse it either with recklessness. As May says, keeping in the back of your mind the fact that you have it on, and perhaps every once in a while looking at it and allowing its beauty or its age or its character to impress you. And sure, if you wear it, it's going to break at some point, and the time you spent wearing it will always feel like it's not enough, that it is still too short. But as May writes, better to wear it for a short time than not at all. So life is like that watch, and we need to figure out how we can find that middle ground. And so in this last chapter, May goes on reviewing the different ways some philosophers looked at death and the skills they developed to deal with our mortality without trying to deny it or to control it. How they found this middle ground, and then we will see what skills May recommends. So in other words, we're looking at how can someone come to terms with the fragility of their own life. So one way is, according to May, to step back a little bit from ourselves and try to see the big picture. If I look at how my life fits in the cosmos, for example, I can come to terms with my fragility. We can say that there are two ways to do that. We can either see that in the grand scheme of things, my life isn't that important, which then leads me to conclude that my death isn't that important either. Quote, placed within the larger picture, we perhaps loosen our grip on life, which makes death less threatening. We see our lives, fragile as they are, as less important than we make them out to be. And if our lives are less important, then our death will be less important as well. Or another way is to see that my fragility totally makes sense when placed in the grand scheme of things. The rationale here is maybe I cannot come to terms with my own fragility because I don't see its purpose. I don't see why life has to be this fragile. If I can, however, see that making life fragile fits well within a bigger picture, that my fragility is what allows something greater than myself to continue to exist, then I can come to terms with my fragility. So both of these approaches can actually be one and the same. By seeing that my fragility plays a big role in the unfolding of the cosmos, I also can conclude that my fragility isn't as important as I thought it was. And this was what the Epicurean Roman philosopher Lucretius suggested. So Lucretius actually provided multiple arguments for why we shouldn't fear death and why we should accept our fragility. One of them is, of course, the one given by Epicurus, and which we discussed last time. But he also provided others. Remember, we've seen that Epicurus's solution to the problem of death wasn't really that satisfying, and so Lucretius, provided other arguments. For example, he has what we call the symmetry argument. Since we know that a bunch of stuff was happening before we were born, and that it doesn't seem to bother us that we missed on all of that stuff. Like we missed Woodstock, we missed the fall of the Berlin Wall. So why would we be bothered by things we will miss after we die? So whenever we die, that won't change much. Or if you say that I don't care about what happened before I was born or what happens after I die, like my concern is I don't want to miss on things while I'm alive. This can be an objection. Okay, so I don't care about what happens before I was born or what happens after I die. My concern is I don't want to miss on things while I am alive. So I'm not anxious because I'm going to miss the first colony on Mars, but because I'm going to miss that spring break with my friends, which is going to happen while I am alive. But again, here we're talking about death, not about the things that you'll miss when you are alive. And even if that's your concern, well, Lucretius is an Epicurean. So what matters is the absence of pain. If before you were born, missing the things that were happening didn't bother you, didn't cause you any pain, you can still say then that there is no reason for them to cause me pain now either. You can say, you can, try to object by saying that's because back then I didn't exist, but now I do. It's like, saying people were stabbing each other before our death, so that didn't bother you then. Why would it bother you now? Well, now it's because I can actually feel the stabbing. I can actually feel the blade cutting through my muscles. Like I didn't have muscles before I was born, so stabbing me wouldn't be a problem. But now, well, I can feel the stabbing. But then Lucretius would say, in the case of missing out, you still have, ways to avoid that pain. You can make that pain and fear go away either by focusing on other things that matter in life. There is never, a shortage of those things. Or you just think about death. The pain that you feel now will be gone after you die. It will become exactly like all the things you missed before your birth. So the symmetry argument still holds. But the argument still relies on the reduction of life to pain and pleasure, which we already discussed with Epicurus, and we've seen that it isn't enough to make our lives meaningful. Sure, it helps if we just want to avoid pain, but if we want more, it's not gonna work. As for May, he argues that the symmetry argument isn't what concerns us here. He is interested in another argument that Lucretius gives, which is, about making our fragility meaningful. And so that argument can be called the more room for other people argument. Okay, so it's a very simple argument. Like it says, if your life didn't have its fragility, and if people keep getting born, at one point will be overcrowded. And so we'll be competing for our resources and for having, a little space in which we can live and breathe in peace. And so those who are born find themselves in already overcrowded environments and with, little resources, since some people will need to be securing their space and the resources more violently and oppressively as the population grows. And those who are living at, in the overcrowded margins will then be reluctant to bring children into the world because they know that their lives will only be worse than their parents. So, according to Lucretius, in such world, not everyone will have, the chance at a decent life with dignity. So, as May writes, in fairness, then, everyone should have a chance at a decent life rather than a life in crowded and harsh conditions. The only way to make this happen is for everyone to have a turn. When your turn is over, it's time to leave turns for the people who follow. So death ensures that everyone has a turn. And sure, the fairness isn't absolute, like we don't all get the same quality or quantity of life, but the argument is about fairness as death has to exist. It's not about how much each one of us should get. Should get. Death has to exist. Our lives must be fragile to have that fairness, that everyone gets a turn. So as May says, what is concerned here is the effect of your and my death on other people. It does not say that death is good for the person who dies. It says that death is good for those who are left. Or more specifically, it says that death is good so that the next generation of those who are left have a shot at living decently. And so we can find the two ways we talked about earlier. Here, by making the focus on others, the argument makes our lives matter less, and so our death should matter less for us. But on the other hand, because of that, now we can see how important our death is for the well-being of others, and we also see that their death is also important for us as well. And so in philosophy, this is also called the other regarding argument rather than a self-regarding argument. And so Lucretius's argument tells us that we can find meaning for our fragility if we stop focusing on ourselves and instead turn our attention to other people's right to have access to the resources and means to have a good life too. So my death and my life are put in a larger perspective that allows it to make sense. He says, rather than being alone with my death, I am instead one person among others whose death fits into a larger pattern of living and dying. My death becomes to have a meaning, a purpose within this larger pattern. And so the purpose it has is very different from any sense of accomplishment. So indeed, so far, we said that death doesn't allow any accomplishment, but only for me. Death doesn't accomplish anything for me here. However, it does accomplish something for others. We see that by dying, I would allow others to have a chance at fuller lives. So here we have a model that doesn't deny death and manages somehow to preserve the meaning of our lives by placing it in a, bigger or larger picture. There is no afterlife in this scenario. I still die and I am not going to survive my death, but I can find consolation in knowing that my death is a benefit for other people in a way that is not at all demeaning, right? Like sometimes saying that your death would make it better, would make it better for me can be quite an insult. It kind of means like you are a nuisance. But here, my death is framed as a way towards understanding, more empathy, like being myself mortal who enjoys his life. I can understand why others would want it, and they also have a right to it. So accepting our fragility can therefore be heroic, since it allows people to experience this world that the world that we love and don't want to leave. Quote, for Lucretius, we do not survive our death. We remain exposed to death throughout our lives in the ways described in chapter 1. Life is fragile, lived always in the face of death. However, when death comes, it will at least be a benefit to others. And indirectly, that may be a consolation to us. So Lucretius's argument spares us having to look for how we can make death hit us at the right time. William's solution again is quite challenging and requires it is demanding actually and requires efforts beyond human capacity. Here, however, we manage to have meaning simply by considering others. Another philosophy now that deals with death or our fragile lives in a similar way as Lucretius is an Eastern philosophy. May here refers to Taoism, which he contrasts to Christianity and Buddhism. In our first video, we've looked at the monotheistic religions and Buddhism, and argued that these two religions have a view that death is always transcended, it's always avoided. You always survive your own death in Christianity, because after you die your soul is going to be judged, and that soul of course is you. You're going to be either sent to heaven or to hell, so you continue to exist after your death. In Buddhism, we've seen that a you is maintained after your death because the doctrine of reincarnation and karma. Karma plays the same function in Buddhism as judgment in Christianity. Your reincarnation needs to rely on fairness. If you spend your life resisting desire, you'll be reincarnated into a higher state, closer to nirvana. Whereas if your life was marked by surrounding to the temptation of desire, you'll be reincarnated in a lower state. So the karma, like Christian judgment, only makes sense if it is you who survive your death. It has to be fair, and therefore the incarnation cannot be random. And so this is where the contrast with Taoism steps in. As May writes, in Taoism, as in Buddhism, there is a cycle of life and death, but there is no karma. Each of us is like a wave on the sea of being. So Taoism has similarities with Buddhism, like cycles of life and death, and the sense of an illusionary self. Like May says, we are just waves on the sea of being, which means that each one of us comes from the cosmos, and then we think of ourselves as unique, as special beings that are free from returning to that ocean from which we originated. And so our sense of self becomes an obstacle to recognize that we will return to where we came from, because returning to where we came from makes us, feel insignificant. If everything returns to the ocean, then we're not very different from anything else. And so if me and the worm or the fly come from the same ocean and will return to the same ocean, I'll be wondering what makes me special or unique in contrast to the fly or the worm. So my existence doesn't seem to be more valuable, to have more meaning than an earthworm's or a fly or a mosquito. Thus, the constant folding and unfolding of the cosmos that Taoism talks about becomes a source of deep anxiety, since it doesn't, distinguish between, the particularities of our lives and the existence of a worm. Those particularities will also vanish as soon as we die. So, Buddhism and Christianity and Islam and Judaism, they try to compensate by offering us an afterlife. Like they say, yeah, true, you'll go back to where you came from dust you'll return to dust, but at least something of you will survive this process. Your particularities will matter. They'll be remembered either by God, who is going to judge you and allow you to enter his kingdom, or by the cosmos itself, who is going to reincarnate you in a being that is directly linked to your past life, since that being is the consequence of your previous life's choices and life's actions. But Taoism, by contrast, doesn't offer that compensation. There is no afterlife in Taoism, no God to judge you, there is no karma to make sure that there is a logical continuity between the past you and the current you and the future you. Instead, Taoism argues that you don't survive your death. What happens is that the stuff that you were made of is going to be used for the creation of other things. Like your molecules, let's say, will be scattered through the cosmos, and they will combine with other molecules, creating new shapes and forms. Like one of the famous Taoist philosophers, Chuang Tzu, I think that's how it is pronounced, writes that after one dies, what he calls the creator will make, will take his different parts and, quote, will perhaps in time transform my left arm into a rooster, or perhaps he'll transform my right arm into a crossbow pellet, and shoot down an owl for roasting, or perhaps in time he'll transform my buttocks into cartwheels. Then with my spirit for a horse, I'll climb up and go for a ride. So this is not to be confused with immortality, because even though the stuff that made you is always there, you as who you are don't survive this process. The you relies on that, that relies on that physical shape to be maintained in order to exist, and since that physical shape doesn't exist anymore, well, that you is going to disappear, is going to die as well. So the reason why monotheism doesn't work is because the you it talks about can survive without its physical shape. It's in Christianity, for example, the you can survive without its material body. In Taoism, however, even though the material stuff doesn't vanish, once your shape is broken, well, you die too. And so, like with Lucretius, here we have a similar function of our death. You die so that other beings can come to existence. So Taoism seems to be more inclusive than Lucretius, since our death isn't just concerned with other humans, but now with all kinds of creatures. So my arms and legs will allow a bird or a fish to exist and experience the world. It is even more decentralized around the notion of self than in Buddhism. There is no karma, no particular shape or form or creature must arise from the dictates of my previous life. If my parts serve to make a deer, there is that has absolutely nothing to do with my past life. Like what I did in my past life, life is not going to determine where my molecules, what my molecules are going to make next. Okay, that would be like karma in Buddhism, but in Taoism there is no notion of karma. So there is nothing in my past actions that make it necessary for my specific leg to become a deer snout, for example. Having my tongue turned into the eyes of a frog is neither a punishment nor a reward. There is no meaning or sense to find in that particular transformation. And May puts it this way. He says, Taoism does not concern itself with the wholeness or conclusion of one's life. One's life and oneself do not matter at all to the cosmos process, whence one came and to which one will return. It is only when one steps back from the concerns of one's own life that Taoism offers its riches. Death does not confer meaning or place to a life. It is the place of life and death in the process that confers meaning. So here both Lucretius and Taoism ask us to let go of our fears of death and of our desires for immortality, because once we look at the general scheme of things, we'll notice that they don't matter that much, that we do not matter that much. Instead, we should be focusing on the well-being of others and on the cosmic process, that keeps unfolding and brings other beings into existence. Now, there is a problem, although these two philosophies, they do help a lot, they manage to tell us a great and valuable, consolation, and they don't deny that we do not survive our death. They still don't do what we are asking them to do. Like, the problem is here. These philosophies are not really addressing the problem that we have with death. Like, they both have a major flaw, and that is that they circumvent the problem rather than addressing it. Our main problem is how can we engage in our vulnerability without denying it. But as May shows, these two philosophies only solve half the problem. They just don't deny death and vulnerability, but they don't engage in it. Quote, if neither perspective denies the fragility of life, it is because neither of them engages it. They do not ask what it is to live a fragile life. That is not their concern. Instead, they ask how we might think of things so that fragility becomes less pressing to us. And so this feels more like they want to shift our attention from, the thing that really bothers us and tell us, to have some perspective. Like that's what they are saying. Once we look at things in their way, whatever, bothers us will be more tolerable or more bearable. But making our lives vulnerable, more tolerable or less pressing, as he says, can easily be seen as a distraction. What we want is experience our vulnerability and not just do some intellectual exercises that make us see that it is less important than it actually is. So the reason why May thinks that is because, well, you can't really do that. You can't make your fragility as a mortal human being you cannot make it about an intellectual exercise, because that reduces the fragility to some sort of abstract knowledge. Like intellectually, you can see how your fragility is beneficial to other people and other creatures. That still isn't enough, because you can believe that, you can know that, and still not care about it. Just like we said in the first video about, belief in an afterlife. You can have that belief, but very few people are sure of that belief or act out on it. You can agree with everything in this book, in the book by May. You can agree to all these arguments, but that doesn't mean that they'll matter to you or that they'll remove your anxiety and fear of death. So your knowledge or conviction about our fragility being beneficial, quote, you can forget it. Not in your beliefs, but in your life. If someone asked you whether life was fragile in the way this book describes, you'd affirm it. But it wouldn't affect you. It would be a snippet of knowledge, like lots of other snippets of knowledge you have. And so this leads May to object to Taoism on the grounds that it doesn't help at all remove the anxiety we have when it comes to death. After all, our problem isn't that the stuff we're made of remains. Our problem is that we do not remain. So knowing that, that for example, that my ass will turn into a chicken leg doesn't take away the anxiety about my projects getting severed. Even though, as May argues, in Taoism there are things to be experienced. Death doesn't mean the end of experience in Taoism, but it means the end of my experience. The specific experience that I want to preserve, let's say, my own ways of experiencing the world, that doesn't survive. And I don't want to experience the world as a horse, for example. I want to experience the world as a human being, and not just as any human being, but as me, as myself. So even if I get to experience the world as a horse, I still would want to have a link between me and that horse. Many people are curious to know, how do animals experience the world? And we see many works of fiction in which, someone turns into a cat, a bird, or a dog, and yeah, they can enjoy that experience of, riding the wind and flying in the sky, but that experience is always contrasted with their experience of human being. Like if I turn into a cat, I'll still remember, the feeling of a human being, and I'll be comparing that with the feeling of being a cat or maybe being a bat. You can check, by the way, Thomas Nigel's famous essay on what it means to be a bat in that theme. So I'll put the link in the description. It's a very good essay. It was very influential, and it's still being debated. But anyway, the point is, I still want to have some sort of continuity. So if Taoism cannot offer more than just you die but you get to be a horse, without the memories of my past life and without giving it meaning, well then Taoism won't do for our purposes here. And there is also another objection I can think of. May doesn't address this one, but if the material stuff is always there, then we can say we still have the same problem with immortality, because matter is immortal. So giving enough time, matter will recreate you. Eventually your molecules will come back together and you'll get to be reborn at one point. So sure, you won't have the memories of your past lives, but since matter is immortal, you still can recreate exactly the same memories. You can get to relive exactly your past life. And since matter is immortal, then you'll definitely relive that past life an infinite number of times. And so knowing that your life will always repeat itself in the same way, that can also make your life meaningless. And another problem is that if matter is immortal, then you are also going to be reborn an infinite amount of times, in which you will have an infinite number of different lives. So saying that matter is immortal, you're basically holding the infinite universe theory, but instead of the universes being parallel to each other, they're just, succeeding one another. And so in this case, you're always going to be, there's always going to be a time for you to do absolutely everything. And therefore, all of the problems with immortality that we've seen last time, well, they kind of come back. So if you have a problem in your relationship, for example, you can be like, okay, there's going to be a time in which our relationship won't have this problem. So I won't have to fix it, to fix anything here. The me that will relive this relationship in 1 billion years will take care of it, right? So I just wanted to point out these two objections that May doesn't address, but there you go. So anyways, and we can also say that it's the same thing with Lucretius, by the way, all right? Like these takes only address the fragility of life, like Taoism and Lucretius. They address the fragility of life from an external point of view that is hard to integrate within our lives. Quote, it does not answer and does not seek to answer the question that occupies us here. How do we live from within the perspective of a fragile life? And so, because for May, this is not something contingent. It's about it's not about a can we live, how can we live, the fragility of life, but how must we live? We're not wondering, can we live within fragility or should we? The answer is already clear for May, like we must live within fragility. The only question we can ask is how? And so, in other words, he asks, can that knowledge have an impact in our lives, in our thinking about our lives? Can we live according to this knowledge? Can we integrate that knowledge into our lives? And that is the question we're pursuing here. So, here one can say that at this point we're demanding the impossible. Like maybe that knowledge is the farthest we can go, and beyond that we just step into the territory of contradictions. And so maybe we should just accept that knowledge, the knowledge that death is just powerful, and we just move on with our lives exactly in the way we were doing so far. But May anticipates this objection. One can say that we cannot live our fragility because our fragility is contradictory. After all, we're saying that death gives and withdraws meaning, which means that living our fragility would require that we live meaningful and meaningless lives at the same time. That is a contradiction, and people cannot live a contradiction. But here May is skeptical. What he says is that he says that no, people cannot believe in a contradiction, but we can live contradictions. However, he doesn't dwell too much on that, since he doesn't need to prove it to make his point. He can just say that the issue with living your fragility doesn't include a contradiction, but rather a paradoxical difficulty. it can be that, you know, it is too difficult to live within fragility, but that wouldn't mean that there is a contradiction here. Instead, we need to look at it differently. He says, if we say that death is the source both of meaninglessness and meaningfulness of life, we are not giving voice to some kind of contradictory statement. The way in which death bestows meaning on life and the way it withdraws it are different. And so the solution, May argues, lies in this difference between how death bestows meaning and how it takes it away. And so this is where we go back to Marcus Aurelius. Now, as you all know, Marcus Aurelius is one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, and you probably know what Stoicism is. By the way, I made a video in which I briefly explain what Stoicism in my video on the book The Ethical Slut. Also, go check it; it's right here. And also, I highlighted why I'm not a Stoic, although I think it's a great philosophy and has a lot of wisdom that can be useful to us. And May seems to agree with that since he comes to the Stoics, Aurelius in particular, because it seems that Stoicism can give us important information on how to live within our fragility. So death and dealing with death is a major theme in Aurelius's book, The Meditations, which we mentioned earlier. And so now we're going to take a more detailed look into it. Now, a bit of warning, if you read the Meditations, you can find that it is quite boring, like there's a lot of repetition, and there is a kind of, you know, preachy tone that Aurelius takes throughout the book. You can say that he's not a good writer either, and lacks some sense of style. If you have that impression when you read his work, well, keep in mind that the Meditations, they weren't meant to be published. Like, he wrote them for himself. He was just, you know, taking notes on his own thoughts. It was like a diary or a personal journal in which he recounts what he did, you know, today, for example, what thoughts occurred to his mind, what thoughts he entertained during the day, what he did good and what he did bad, etc. His purpose was never to make, you know, other people read these notes. As he himself said, everything a man does is going to eventually disappear. So no matter how great he was, and Aurelius was a Roman emperor. Now, yeah, you can say that it's kind of ironic that, you know, his book is one of the most famous books in philosophy and is one of the most read books in the world. But that's because the book is very powerful and helpful because of its flaws. Like the repetitiveness and the preachiness make sense once we understand what Marcus Aurelius was doing with these notes. He was doing what the philosopher Pierre Hadot called spiritual exercises, and these can be defined as, quote, this is from May, it is a certain type of mental exercise. The idea behind these types of mental exercises is that they ready a person for what is about to come. Doing them is like putting on a certain mental armor or girding one's emotional loins. So in other words, it's things that you do or say to yourself to be in the right state of mind when you're about to do something difficult. Like if you are going to make a speech in front of a crowd and you get nervous, you can do a spiritual exercise to boost your confidence. It's like telling yourself, you know, that going out there isn't so bad because even if you screw up, it won't matter in the bigger scheme of things, for example. So what you do in spiritual exercises is you project yourself into the act and see how things would go. And the point is to get rid, is to get you ready to do those things by showing you what is there to expect and mentally prepare yourself for those possibilities. So the point is to make sure that when you do the public speech or when you prepare yourself for, you know, I don't know, working out or going for a run, you always you have, you know, like for example, you want to go to the gym and you want to work out, but you have body image issues, okay, let's say. You need to look at the situation from a distance and be prepared for whatever can happen once you go to the gym, because you have to go to the gym, you know, and so you think of all the possibilities, what is the worst that can happen, okay? And you see what's the worst that can happen, and you be like, okay, I have to be prepared for that, but you know, at the end you have to go to the gym. So quote, when faced with these difficulties of the presentation or the run or whatever, one is not taken by surprise. Yes, one tells oneself, here is what I expected. So of course it will be, you know, repetitive and preachy, the book, the meditations, because one, you need to do these exercises every day, and writing them down can make them even more potent, you know. So that's why it's repetitive. Some therapies even recommend that you do that when you have insecurities that are ruining your life, you sit down and you write down things you ought to do, you ought to be doing in order to control those insecurities. So yeah, insecurities will show up regularly, so you're going to write those thoughts multiple times. So it's kind of a reminder for you of what you do when those difficulties arise. So Aurelius isn't sketching a theory of Stoicism in which he doesn't have to be repetitive. The book isn't a manual to spiritual exercises. It's actually an example of spiritual exercises. So similarly, it makes sense that it is preachy, because Aurelius isn't telling the reader that they are doing everything wrong. He's not preaching to you, accusing you of having flaws, for not, you know, doing things in the right way, like, you know, like a Petersonian psychologist would. Instead, he's actually preaching to himself. He is, you know, blaming himself for his own failures, and so that's why he is writing, you know, the meditation in a preachy way. We have to read the meditations, like May says, as expressions of a man struggling with himself and often seeing himself as a failure. It's as though he often said to himself, you knew what was important yesterday and yet you will not live up to it today. So for example, Stoics hold that, you know, a virtuous man never succumbs to anger, never acts out on anger. So if a Stoic fails at that, if they get angry during the day and shout at someone in traffic, when they get home, they take their diary and write, you can't give in to anger. Don't you have any respect for your masters who taught you better? You know, the masters are, you know, the Stoics that taught you Stoicism. So you would write things like that. So that's why it sounds preachy. And so May provides an example in which Aurelius blames himself for procrastination, for example. Many of us procrastinate and we often feel guilty when we don't get things done. And so, well, so does Aurelius. And he is very judgy and harsh because he is ashamed of his failure at being, you know, productive, and that he wasted, you know, opportunities to do what he's supposed to do. This is a quote from Aurelius. Think of your many years of procrastination, how the gods have repeatedly granted you further periods of grace of which you have taken no advantage. So if Aurelius is hard on someone, it is on himself. It is not on the reader. So he's blaming himself for not being a good Stoic who let himself get, you know, driven by the behavior of, for example, other people. In Stoicism, you control your behavior and your emotions when you interact with an event. If I get mad at, you know, someone in traffic, then I let the other person's behavior control mine. So that is a failure for the Stoic. The external world cannot have, you know, that effect on me. Only me can have that effect on me. And so Aurelius insists that to avoid succumbing to the effects of the external world, we should leave our home every day expecting those effects. When someone expects to meet a jerk in traffic, they can remain calm in contrast to someone who didn't expect to meet a jerk in traffic today. So it's like saying whomever honks at you, whomever honks at you when the light turns green, remember that you have to keep your cool. And so Here's another quote from the emperor himself, begging. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. All of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. So, to put it mildly, what matters for the Stoic is their inner peace, which must be maintained all the time, because it is by being peaceful that we can know the world objectively. When you are in pain, when you are in trouble, or when you are driven by other people's behavior, you won't think objectively about the world. You'll be more concerned with ending the pain or following your own personal interests, and those will only trouble your inner peace even more. And so they will drive you further away from the objective world. So what you lose when you lose objectivity is perspective. You forget to see, well, the bigger, scheme of things, that things don't matter that much, so no need to attach yourself to them. Not only the things we often attach ourselves to are superfluous and probably wrong, but they also cause us a lot of pain and a lot of pain to others. So it is better to focus on the things that really matter. And this is not to embrace Epicureanism or Taoism. This is not look at the big picture, and you'll see that your mortality isn't so bad because you are afraid that death will take away the things that you are attached to. Like people would be afraid to die because they are attached to fame or to money, things that death will eventually take away. And so those things are illusions for the Stoics. And we will see that they're illusions if we look at the big picture. The big picture. So this is very similar to Epicureanism and Taoism, but you'll see there is a difference. But for now, this is one of the main. This is one of the main, tenets of Stoicism. Don't attach yourself to things that don't matter. But the difference with Stoicism is that this is not other regarding. Remember we said that there is the other regarding argument in which you find some sort of meaning because you put your intention on others. And that's contrasted with a self-regarding argument in which you put the attention on yourself. Here in Stoicism, it's not an other regarding argument. Okay, like Epicureanism and like in the argument given by Lucretius, and Taoism is other regarding argument. But for Stoicism, no, Stoicism is more a self-regarding argument. The bigger scheme of things for Stoics isn't about seeing that our death is beneficial for others. Rather, death is here, quote, to remind us of how soon each of us is forgotten. We do much to impress ourselves upon the world, to make ourselves remembered, to imprint our existence, and yet, as Aurelius often reminds himself, after we die, we are quickly forgotten. Our legacy is short in the larger span of history. All of us, he reminds himself, are creatures of a day, the rememberer and the remembered alike. And so the appeal behind this is that when death makes your success insignificant, it also does the same to your failures. When you ponder on death, when you are about to do a speech, for example, you can say that after all, I'm going to die one day, and all of the people who saw my horrible performance will die too, and the people who know about it from them will also follow. And so soon enough, no one is going to remember my failures. So why should I be afraid of going on that stage? So when I think about death in this way, when I put my existence in the wider picture, I see no reason why not go, on that stage and live the moment. So unlike the Taoists and Lucretius, Aurelius brings back the self-regarding aspect of the problem. He utilizes his knowledge that he is going to die in a specific way, to enjoy this life and accomplish his task or purpose as a human being. And so Stoics believe that each individual is born for a specific purpose or an ensemble of things to do or in order to be fulfilled. And those things, they say, it's given by nature. Hence, you always find Stoic philosophers saying that you should live according to nature. Just like a bee's nature is to make honey, human beings have a nature that demand that we do things. They must be, for example, committed to some duties, being ethical, not getting angry, doing your job, etc. Aurelius is an emperor, so he has a lot of responsibilities. It is a big commitment that comes with a huge burden, and most Roman emperors were chaotic, psychopathic, insane, but Aurelius is remembered for being one of the best emperors of Rome, precisely because he took on his commitment very seriously. And so failing at those commitments, he didn't become like some sort of Nero or some sort of Caligula. Those were really very fucked up in the head. Instead, Aurelius reminds himself of his duties. What matters is to be doing them. That's why he is so preachy about procrastination. And by the way, the fact that an emperor has these failings also kind of makes it easy on us. Like we often feel guilty a lot, blame ourselves a lot. But when you remember that even Marcus Aurelius had problems with procrastinations, that even an emperor had problems with procrastinations. I mean, I don't know, it kind of makes the burden lighter. And so anyways, like the point is that you should be focusing on your duties. Duties are like the projects that May talked about in this sense. Fulfilling them is therefore the way towards a meaningful life. But we don't have all the time of the world to fulfill our duties. We are going to die eventually, and we don't know when, so we have no time to lose thinking about chimeras like fame or fortune. We have no time to be thinking about things that are contingent, that are ephemeral, that things like the future and the past. People who are always anxious about the future don't commit to their duties, and people stuck in nostalgia, wanting to relive, a lost past, don't do much either. Duties require that we live in the present, and this is what death is useful for. Quote, it's Marcus Aurelius, brings death to bear in trying to get himself to live as he ought to. Often he enlists death to help him live in accordance with the Stoic belief that only the present exists. The future is not yet, and the past is no longer. One must live fully in the present. So, the time that we spend worrying about the future or about the past is a time you can be spent working on your duties. It is therefore a time that is wasted. Death is here to remind us that we don't have the luxury of wasting time by thinking about hypothetical scenarios that are not guaranteed, or scenarios that already disappeared, that are already in the past. So instead, what is guaranteed is the meaningfulness of one's life when one lives in the present moment. And this is because one cannot control the future, but one can control the present. As we said, you can control how to act and how to behave when interacting with the external world. The Stoics believe that no matter what situation you find yourself in, no matter how limited you can be, you still have the opportunity to live according to your nature. So every situation for them comes with its duties, and those duties are always compatible with our nature as human beings. Sure, some situations have different duties for different people, since not everyone has the same means or conditions to deal with their situation, but everyone always have some duties that they do in all kinds of situations that are fit for human beings. So even being a prisoner, for example, comes with its duties. Okay, meditating is one of those duties. When a Stoic ends up in jail, for example, he still has to be a Stoic, perhaps more than ever. That's because in every situation there are always things that you can control, and whatever you can control is your duty. and it is your out of jail free card. And so the thing that you must never do is to have expectations that would be something you cannot control, and you will always be disappointed. Quote, Stoic doctrine emphasizes that one should only seek to control what one can actually control. One cannot control the way the world is, one can only control how one reacts to the world. So if you are in jail, well, your happiness is going to be determined on how you react to that. If you react by being committed to the duties you have towards yourself as a prisoner, meaning that you keep focusing on your inner peace, you keep doing spiritual exercises, then you'll be fine. So start expecting that someone is going to come and save you, and you'll be just troubling yourself. You'll be adding more pain to injury. Quote, if you hang your expectations on hope and hopes on the world, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. Moreover, you are turning control of your life over to the world. It's better to retain the control yourself. If you can't control what goes on in the world, then focus on your energies on what you can control. So it's also worth to know that Stoics hold that even suicide can be a duty towards yourself in some situations. Like if you are in a situation in which you cannot hold on to Stoicism, for example, like you cannot hold on to Stoicism anymore because, let's say, the pain is too unbearable, or you are sent to be executed, you have a duty not to make it worse for yourself. And so if there are no other options, suicide then would be allowed in Stoicism. But May doesn't really bring up this point in his review of Aurelius, despite that he mentions this in the 10th book of his meditations. But it should be noted. Anyways, the point is to focus on what you can control, and that is to be and that is to live in the present. That's what you can control. You can control the present, which means that you can control your projects and your duties. And so to be fully committed to them, because only the present exists, is what will make your life meaningful. Neither future nor the past exist. The former isn't here yet, and it is also unknowable, and the latter is gone. So, quote, since the future does not exist, nothing of it is guaranteed. We may have years to live, we may have only one day, so we cannot live with expectations about the future. We can only make the present our duty. We must live well now, without concern for a future whose shape and existence is unclear to us. So, if we live in the present, we'd be accomplishing our nature, because it's the only thing we have control over. We can only work on who we are right now. We'd then be happy, content, fulfilled, immersed in our purpose. Then, when death comes and cuts short our threads, we'll have no regret, because we lived like we were supposed to do. We made the best possible shape we could have done, because we were doing our tasks like with 100%, fully invested in them. We lived every moment in the present. Quote, for Aurelius, the role of death in his meditative life is to force him to live in the present, reminding himself of the contingency of the future and the shortness of his influence are ways of ensuring that he places his focus on living well now. So of course, this living in the present isn't again a YOLO anthem. Many today would take, the living in the present as a call for hedonism, to enjoy, the pleasures of life and not, to think of the consequences. On the contrary, Stoics want you to think about the consequences of your actions. Engaging in full-on hedonistic behavior, where you just, look for pleasures and enjoyments, will have disastrous consequences on your morals. You won't be living in the present in this sense, even though you are right now having the best sex ever and fully immersed in it. Stoics are not hedonists, as May says. When we say live in the present, it is to mean live an ethical life. Okay, so being too worried about the future or expecting things from the future can make you focus your energy and attention away from your duties, which is, the core of Stoic ethics. Quote: "If the future cannot guarantee him material success or good reputation or even long remembrance, then it would be folly to concern himself with these things. All he can control is how he lives in the present. So what he ought to do is live as he should in the moment, be at peace, treat others well, recognize who he is. These are the tasks that meditating on death will help him focus on." Okay, so it seems we've done it. We're done this time. Like, we cracked the code, right? Right, May? Well, no. May is not satisfied with Aurelius' solution. He finds fault in it because, as he argues, Aurelius' solution is just, well, that's impossible to do, actually. Like, Aurelius's solution is impossible, and the reason it is impossible is because one cannot actually live in the present, at least in how Aurelius wants us to live in the present. Even for a Stoic philosopher, actually, May says it is impossible to do. And let's see why. So first of all, May points that Aurelius is he's kinda cheating here with the third theme of death, that death is inevitable and uncertain. While Aurelius recognizes that death is inevitable, he ignores the uncertainty. And we need a practice of accepting death that takes on, remember, all the four themes of death. That death is the end of us, that it cuts our projects short, that it is inevitable and uncertain, and so it makes our lives meaningless. And so we got a practice that fits almost everything. Like Marcus Aurelius, like Stoicism, it solves the first theme, the second theme, but unfortunately, it only fits half of the third theme. Like we're almost there, but unfortunately, almost isn't what we are after. We need that all the themes are covered. And so, how does Aurelius misses on the uncertainty? Well, by insisting that we live in the present, actually. Like, living in the present entails the negation of the future's uncertainty. Quote: "What Aurelius's desire to live in the present reflects is to control who one is and what one becomes. But if what I'm saying here is right, then that desire for control misses one of the aspects of death, the uncertainty of the future. To be able to live in the present, Aurelius tells us that we have to keep in mind that death can happen at any time, right? If you die tomorrow while not doing your duties, you'd have failed to live according to your nature. And so, what should you do? Well, do your duties because you might die tomorrow. And so we can ask ourselves, well, how does that neglect uncertainty? Well, because to say that you should live in the present because you might die tomorrow is also saying live today as if you're going to die tomorrow. And so, in other words, as May puts it, the problem with living in the present is that this is to act as though there really is no future. It is to treat death as though it is uncertain, but instead as though it is certain. Okay? It is not to treat death, it's not to treat death as though it is uncertain, but instead as though it is certain, as if it will come tomorrow. And so the uncertainty of death means that death may come tomorrow, but it also may not come tomorrow. But here Aurelius is telling us to live as if we are certain that death will come tomorrow. Quote, if we are to live in accordance with our understanding of death, if we are to live the fragility of our lives, we must not only take into account that death might come tomorrow, we must also take into account that it might not. To live with the uncertainty of death is to embrace both of these aspects, not just one. And so if we follow Aurelius's argument, we can see why he can live in the present. It's because indeed he asserts that there is no future because death will come tomorrow. So there won't be any future for you. You know, his solution is completely one-sided, whereas, as we said, we need both sides of the coin. And so here Aurelius fails, he falls for the same trap as religious people we mentioned before. This is a belief that we don't actually believe in. We don't believe in an afterlife, right? But it's the same with the case about the future. Aurelius wants a belief that the future doesn't exist, but he doesn't believe in that. He doesn't believe that the future doesn't exist. Rather, the future does exist, or at least may exist, and so we can't rule it out from our solution. We can't just live in the present by eliminating the future or acting as if the future doesn't exist. That would be too easy. And so the future is uncertain, might as well just say that it doesn't exist and be done with it. The problem is we cannot take this easy way out, and Aurelius kind of knows this. He acts on it even though he doesn't say it. And why does May think that? Well, because Aurelius is not a Stoic. He wants to become a Stoic. Stoicism is a project for Marcus Aurelius, which means that he is contemplating it in the future. Like he's, thinking about the future in which he becomes a Stoic or a perfect Stoic. But if he believes that the future doesn't exist, then he cannot have the project of becoming a Stoic. So Stoicism would therefore become something against his nature, since it is preventing him from living in the present. Since he's taken on that project, it means that he has to acknowledge that death may not come tomorrow. The future may exist. And so May gives an example with one of the imperatives of Stoicism, which is to treat others well. In the case of wanting to be devoted to the well-being of other people, one must take into account the future, because, quote, if I were to want to promote your welfare, it would make a difference if I knew you were going to die tomorrow. I would probably focus on different things from those I would focus on if I knew you had many years to live. How I treat you then, if I speak to treat you well, it depends on how I think about your future. So Aurelius must take a leap of faith here and live while immersed in a project that may be cut short. There is, an urgency to become a Stoic, of course, and he must work on that project like right now. But that urgency and that imperative of living in the present are both derived, as May says, not from a certainty that there is no future, but, quote, from the uncertainty of the future. He might not have more time to devote to making himself a better Stoic, but then again he might, and he probably needs that time in order to learn how to become more disciplined in his life. So Aurelius's meditations then, and the life he seeks to live in accordance with them, is not exactly a living in the present. It is a living in the present and at the same time in an uncertain future. So how can we make this consistent? How can we have it both ways, like inevitability and uncertainty? Well, clearly, May holds that the Stoics are right to want to live in the present. They must do it in a consistent way, a way that doesn't negate the uncertainty of the future. So, for May, we can take some things from Aurelius. His philosophy has a good point, as that it uses death to force us to live in the present. However, Aurelius's concept of death is lacking. It lacks the uncertainty. So what May suggests is to make it so that this, uncertainty, without denying the other themes of death, becomes itself a push towards living in the future, in the present. Sorry. Okay. So we want to make uncertainty something that motivates us to live in the present. Aurelius says, in order to be motivated to live in the present, had to deny, uncertainty. But we need uncertainty to have that motivation. Quote, it is instead that the uncertainty of the future does push us in the direction of living in the present. So, unlike the Stoics, who require certainty in order to live in the present, May argues that we don't need that for living in the present. Uncertainty can do it for us. And so the uncertainty of death is also exemplified in the fragility of life. May starts from something observable. He observes that what makes life fragile, besides the whole death thing, is that we don't have a manual on how to lead a good life. We have, this antique watch, but we don't know what is the proper way for it to function. So everything that we do with it, we never know if it's going to make it work or if it is going to break it. So we have we don't have we may have an outline, like a general outline of what to do with the watch, but the specificities are left up to us. And when it's those specificities, those elements that actually make the watch work, more than the outline or the general or the overall framework. So living in the moment has kind of to be like that. We do our duties, but without the certainty that the future doesn't exist. All right. Rather, we do them knowing that we may or may not be alive tomorrow. That the project may or may not continue. Quote, it means immersing oneself in projects without the recognition that those projects are all vulnerable to death and that inevitably some of them will fall to death. Recall that one of the key characteristics of being human is having projects that extend themselves into the future. We live in the future as we live in the present. And so, to live in the present in a Stoic way, as May says, is impossible because we are human beings. That is, creatures that make projects. Duties to those projects cannot be sustained if we are involved in them, only in the present. We are also engaged in those duties in the future as well. And so, if anything, living according to our nature would be closer to living in the present and the future rather than just in the present. Without that future, we wouldn't make projects at all. Like Aurelius himself, he lived only in the present. If he lived only in the present, he wouldn't be able to become a Stoic. A life without projects, without hobbies, without a future won't be a human life. Maybe an animal life or an immortal's being life, but it won't be a human one. So projects, relationships, hobbies, spiritual exercises, meditations, all of these, quote, these are central elements of a human life. In facing death and the fragility of life, we cannot abandon our projects to live in the present. We must integrate them somehow. So here May offers an analogy to better understand what he means. He is taking this again from his personal experience. He says that he's been on road trips with friends with whom they talked about, philosophy, political issues, the environment, their practical lives, etc. And then he says, I look at the road, I am aware of the traffic and consider how far there is to go. But I'm also very much with my friend. I am both in the present in my relationship and in the future in my driving. So looking at the road means that he is considering how long he has to be with his friend on the ride. Whenever we talk with our friends, we always do that. We look at roads and try to estimate how much we still have to go. Like conversations are themselves projects. When I have a great conversation with someone, that entails that there may be others that there are going to be other conversations, and that might be enough for me. I know that some actions and conversations will lead to friendships while others won't, and I can't know which one will. But I don't need to have that certainty for me to have a good conversation or to be present at that conversation. Projects are like casting a net in the sea. You don't know what you are going to catch, but you will eventually catch something. You don't even know for how long you will have, the fish before it jumps back into the sea, but still you cast the net because you project that you may catch something. And so friendships are kind of like that. In order for you to start a friendship, you are going to need to throw in the conversation and hope that it will lead somewhere. So if the friendship is formed, you still keep throwing the net. You still have conversations, so that you keep the friendship going, knowing that it is very unlikely that the friendship will end when the conversation ends, right? So, quote, "My friendship with my friend is something I project out into the future. We sometimes discuss plans for future cooperative work, and even when we don't, in the background of our conversation is the idea that our relationship is not likely to end with this car ride." And so here May tells us that what we have to do is to live the future in its contingency. It means that you keep casting your net with the knowledge that you may or may not catch a fish, and you may or may not keep the fish in the boat. So you engage in projects knowing that some or all of them will be cut off by death. If it gets difficult, like having to live with such a level of uncertainty and instability, like you have to be willing to invest like so much a lot of times in projects, in relationships, in hobbies that you don't know that you don't know if they will lead to anything. Yeah, that kind of can get scary. We can get scared because of that. Like, what if the person dies or leaves us? Maybe we've placed so many hopes and efforts in a relationship or another project, and it didn't work. And yes, having a social safety net is something we should embrace, but you have to remember that here we're talking about an existential topic, one that can never be solved with no amount of safety, of social safety nets. Like those can reduce, like having some sort of guarantee, some sort of safety net. Those can reduce the uncertainty, but the uncertainty will always remain. And when it comes to death, any amount of uncertainty is enough to make us, spiral down into, existential angst. So when things get difficult, what do we do? Well, this is why we have the present. By focusing on the present while having that uncertainty in mind, we can even experience that uncertainty as a motivator for keeping engaged in our projects. Quote, "We live towards the future in the present. We do not shy away from the fact that our future may be taken from us and that sooner or later it will. So we take up the future in the present. We live in the present and in an uncertain future. We live both now." So May did experience that as he wrote the book. Like many times he felt the anxiety of maybe not finishing the book, or maybe dying before typing the last letter or the last bullet point. This was indeed very scary for him, but it didn't lead him to despair. He gives two reasons for that. The first reason is that he enjoys writing, quote, "Sitting down at the computer each day with ideas that seem worth thinking and writing about is meaningful to me. In that sense, I can live in the present with this book. being taken up with ideas in the way I do when I write does not need a future. It is an Aurelian present. And the second reason was that he knew he may or may not finish the book, but he still wanted it to be completed and published. I project that future out when I write, but I know, particularly in the case of this book, that future may not come to pass. That is the contingency I seek to live with, to come to terms with. It is a projecting out into the future of a task that may not come to fruition. So we can here, for example, return to the saxophone. Remember, we said that May used to play the saxophone when he was younger, and he was a fan of John Coltrane, the famous jazz musician. He sees in Coltrane someone who lived his passion to the fullest. Like Coltrane was a huge experimentalist. He was a experimenter. He was always looking for creating new sounds with his saxophone. Some can say that he even wanted to make the saxophone sound like something that transcends the saxophone, The constant experimentation made Coltrane seen on stage like he was completely taken by the music, like he was absorbed in it, completely. And May, reports from like Coltrane, he gives this anecdote from Coltrane's drummer, quote, "This absorption, however, did not mean that he could not orient his solo towards the future." Elvin Jones once commented that people who saw his playing mistook him for being lost in the music. On the contrary, Jones noted, although he was into his music, he always seemed to know what he was doing and where he wanted to push it. This does not mean that he knew where it would wind up, but even while in the moment, he was at the same time not entirely of the moment. Coltrane was at once absorbed, projecting, and searching. And so this means that even though the experimenting and the passion with which he was playing on stage seem like he's completely absorbed in the present moment, pressing each note as if each one stands on its own without necessarily another one following, like there's no continuity between the notes. May argues that Coltrane knew what he was doing. He may didn't know what the music was going to look like at the end, but he always knew what note would come later. And so this is the uncertainty that we are talking about. You can think of it like in a relationship. You don't need to know that the relationship will always last in the future for you to invest in it. Sure, you need to know that your partner is going to react to a gift or to your vulnerable moments in order for you to to invest in the relationship. If you are afraid that your partner may be rude to you when you buy her something, or she dismisses your emotions when you are opening up, chances are that you are in a bad relationship. You do need some stability to do the right thing. You need to know that your partner will appreciate your actions for them, but you cannot know that every time. Okay, you cannot know that like overall on the whole relationship. There has to be a guarantee for the entire relationship that it will be a success to do your desires towards your partner. That sort of guarantee cannot exist. Okay, you cannot have a guarantee that through the entire relationship that your duties are always going to be fulfilled or stuff like that. And likewise, they must do their duties by recognizing and appreciating what you do for them. As someone said, you can't have gratitude without fear. So if someone is afraid that if they show appreciation and gratitude, then they the other can use that against them. Like they'll feel that they owe you something and you can abuse that, and so you won't get appreciation because of that fear. These are things that can cause a relationship to fail. But what they are saying is that you do need to have some knowledge over the next note, but how the relationship will be at the end, that's an uncertainty that we just have to live with. Otherwise, we won't have the chance of experiencing a relationship at all. And so the fact that Coltrane is a jazz musician isn't without significance, because jazz is known for being full of cuts between the notes. It's about improvisation. It seems chaotic to some who can't predict what's the next note. But when it comes, for example, to jazz rap, for example, then we can have, something more concrete. Like in hip hop, you always have a rhythm, a beat that repeats itself. There is some stability, some sort of repetition within the improvisation of jazz. And so this kind of music can be deemed Deleuzian. Like Gilles Deleuze was a French philosopher who wrote a book called Repetition with Difference, in which he basically argues that each time something repeats itself, it creates something new, which means that there is always an uncertainty within the future of repetition. So Deleuze also happens to be one of May's favorite philosophers, and May did a whole seminar on Deleuze, which you can find it online. It's very amazing. Anyone who wants to learn about Deleuze, I really recommend that you watch the seminar that Todd May did on Deleuze. I will eventually do a series of videos on difference and repetition in the future. I don't know when, but it's a very thick book, but it's an amazing book. I love Deleuze, and I will do it someday. Anyway, so back to Coltrane. Now, as May stresses, we don't have to be Coltranes in order to have meaningful lives. We don't need to live with just one passion for that. What Coltrane did with jazz, we can also do it with all kinds of projects. Like ordinary lives with ordinary projects, they also fit in May's approach to death. We can live our lives, pursue our careers, engage our friends, and follow our passions in both the fullness of the moment and the contingency of the future. And of course, we need not to make every single one of our projects like Coltrane's passion. After all, we already argued that death puts us always in front of choices. We have to know which thing which thing is important and which thing is not, which projects are worth pursuing and which ones are not, and that, according to May, is the first task of death. First, it asks of us which among our projects are the ones worth pursuing, what matter and what does not. So true, when we choose projects worth pursuing and we find that we lack the means to fulfill them, that can feel extremely, frustrating. But that's more an issue of how societies are organized than about the choices themselves. Like certainly we can make societies in which people can know better and easier what matters for them and make the means to remain engaged in those projects more accessible. I feel like May doesn't really talk about this issue, like the social dimension of how we approach our projects. I feel like he kind of takes it as if we all have the same abilities to choose projects, whereas most of us are engaged in projects that don't matter to us out of necessity. I'll do a review on books, that address this particular issue, that a lot of people stay in projects that didn't matter for them because of social pressure or economic necessity. But I don't think that takes away much of May's argument. Like the essence of the argument, it's still insightful, and I think it's pretty convincing, I would say. Yes, when you put aside the material conditions of existence, which can be solved by better social models based on cooperation and democratization of means of production, those things aside, I think May's take on death is right. Indeed, here's a quote that I like from May. "Death helps separate life's wheat from its chaff. It is not that each moment must be a sublime experience. To seek that would be to neglect the future for the sake of the present. Projects involve a commitment to the future, a commitment that almost always requires some degree of mundane work." So we can just make models in which the mundane work, would work for everyone, and that wouldn't overshadow much of their passionate projects, and I believe this is feasible. The other task that May identifies is that death also allows you to know what is relevant or not about your own important projects. And this one, he writes, is not about our projects, but within them. This task is at least as important as the first one, and maybe more so because it concerns temptations that we fall into too easily. Now here he's referring to the things that are associated with your meaningful projects, but don't add much to it. If anything, they just make it less enjoyable. If you look at death, the uncertain future can give you the urgency to limit those elements as much as possible. Like May takes his job as an example. He's an academic and he loves his job. That's his project now. But as he says, there are some things that can suck the meaning out of those jobs. In the case of May, it's office politics. Quote, who gets the corner office, who the boss likes and doesn't like, who exactly the flow chart of responsibility, how exactly the flow chart of responsibility is structured, who is getting undeserved perks or a few more dollars to travel, what authority each person gets to exercise, and just to add one peculiar to philosophy, who is doing real philosophy and who is just engaged in pointless critique or meaningless jargon. So these are the things that May doesn't like about his job, and I can tell you from the gossip I heard from teachers you know, and colleagues, there's a lot of stupid competition over those things. People can be afraid that, you know, someone is going to best them or take, you know, their parking space, and so they wage battles against each other, and they want to, you know, they want some prestige positions. They try to sabotage or bad mouth each other's works. This one, you know, isn't like they be saying, well, this one is not doing real philosophy. That one doesn't know how to teach. This person doesn't deserve this. That person doesn't deserve that, etc. So, like, sometimes being an academic, I'm not an academic, but like this is what I hear from them sometimes. Being an academic can get to your head, and death can remind us that those things shouldn't be as important as, you know, your actual job as an academic. Or, you know, it can also be administrative shift that, you know, takes too much of your time and your energy, and, you know, all of that time and your energy you can, you know, you waste it away, and you can end up making you feel like you're doing, you know, a bullshit job, like an intern in a startup. Like, there are people who left academia because of those issues. Like, they left academia while complaining about similar issues, that, you know, they found themselves doing more administrative work than actual, you know, teaching or research. Now, of course, this too can have, you know, the same limits as the previous task. Not everyone can afford to lose their jobs because they refuse administrative work, and many would be tempted by office politics because they know the job market is, you know, it's just crushing them. So they want to secure their positions and try to stifle competition. But it can also work the other way around. Like, death can be a motivator for you to provide yourself and your colleagues healthy work environments. Like, you don't want to lose, you know, the passion about your work, and you get involved into office politics to secure the right conditions for everyone to enjoy their projects there. And so, knowing that we are mortals, by making us, you know, able to distinguish the wheat from the chaff, can be a revolutionary force, a motivation towards, you know, making societies and environment and working environments in which, you know, separating the wheat from the chaff is possible for everybody, not just for those who can afford it. And, you know, May knows this. He's an anarchist. He has, you know, very interesting political positions, and I will cover them another time. But as he says, death gives some perspective to all of this. It poses the question: if we are going to die, you know not when is this. If you are going to die and you know not when, is this an element of your project you really must engage yourself in? And so this doesn't just require an individual initiative, but also a collective one. He already agrees that when, you know, sexism and racism enter into the mix, these must be addressed, because indeed, I don't want to work on my project in a sexist or in a racist setting. But I need to have the means to confront those issues and to make sure that I am not alone, that others are with me, and that we can, you know, have control over our organization of the workplace. But office politics have a lot of elements that are not social related, and more about, you know, us not facing our death properly, let's say. Some of the problems in office politics can stem from forgetting that we are mortal and that we don't pay enough attention to our fragility. Quote, but much of what passes for office politics is really of no account, and our engagement in it does not so much display our skill at navigating our work environment as it does our forgetting of ourselves as mortal creatures. And so what he says is that there are things that are worth dwelling on or engage in even within our project. Life is too short for that, as he says. Okay, so we cannot consider everything that can be involved in a project. Quote, it is too short to allow getting sidetracked into projects and squabbles and frustrations and temptations that aren't in the end significant. And so death is therefore the way to allow us to distinguish those and excommunicate them from our lives and projects. It is also death that gives us reasons to having to choose the projects that are laid before us. With death, I must choose, and in choosing, I must recognize that my choices may or may not be carried through. They are not guaranteed, but nor are they eliminated from the outset. So we can say that we finally reached a point in which we are both living in the present and the uncertainty of the future. We have now, proven that while death confers meaning to our lives, that meaning is only because it can only be given because death takes it away. It wouldn't be possible otherwise to have meaning. It's not that death is bad or is an evil in the sense like there wouldn't have been another option for us as human beings. It's just that for humans to have meaning, they need to be mortal. Okay, quote, to die brings to a pointless end the involvement that make up our lives, and yet without that pointless and those involvements themselves might have no point. They would only be part of the endless passing show. They would not be unable to touch us. That is to say, without the beauty of the moments that we are granted in life, our death would be no tragedy, and without the tragedy of death, these moments would have no beauty. To be human is to die. So hence we understand what he meant by having no regrets when he was about to die on that plane that we mentioned in the first video. He didn't regret anything precisely because his life was, well, pretty sweet. He liked it, and because his mortality showed him what mattered in his existence and what is important in his existence even to this day. And he sees that what matters is what he has, okay? What matters is just what he has right now. His fragility makes his life beautiful, and if to be able to experience that beauty means that he has to sacrifice closure or completeness and the same meaning he derives from that beauty, well, May simply tells us that it is worth it. And so as a concluding quote, for all of us, our death is difficult to face. The argument of this book has been that if we understand this difficulty, if we are willing to face it squarely without illusion or escape, we might use its power to make something of ourselves that we do not regret. To forge our lives under the haunting shadow of death is both our reality and our opportunity. Death is what makes us the vulnerable creatures that we are, and what gives us the tools to fashion that vulnerability into something worth having lived. Okay, so that was Death by Todd May. I hope you enjoyed these three videos. I hope that everything that I said made sense. I sometimes get really tired as I go through these long videos, and I'm not really sure that I pronounce things right or if I make sentences that make sense. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this, and you will read Todd May. You will read this book, and yeah, I mean, support the channel, subscribe, like the video, share it, be free to leave a comment, and I will see you next time for a new review. I'm gonna start reviewing another book soon, and I will see you then. Thank you so much.